Most workers assume that if their safety gear meets OSHA requirements, they are protected. But safety experts say there is a growing gap between equipment that is technically compliant and equipment that reflects the latest advances in worker protection. And as June is National Safety Month, what better time to catch up with Cam Mackey, President and CEO of the International Safety Equipment Association, to learn more about how hard hats, safety glasses, and gloves can meet minimum standards but still not provide the most current level of protection available. Cam, welcome to Metal Construction News.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. Really glad to be here.
Now, Cam, before we jump into some of the things we're going to talk about today, let's get to know ISEA, ISEA a little bit better. Tell me a little bit about the International Safety Equipment Association.
Yeah, no, thanks, Anthony. I like to say I have one of the coolest jobs on earth. So I get to represent the industry that protects about 127 million workers in the US that wear PPE. So it's when you think about what we care about, it is making sure that those workers go home safe to their loved ones every day. So it's a mission. It's not just a job. It really is something I'm passionate about. And, in terms of when we say PPE and safety equipment, it's really broad, right? We all, of course, got, familiar with the term PPE during COVID, but say you're, driving down the road, you see some roadside workers wearing bright, high visibility vests. That's the PPE industry. If we're in a grocery store and someone's, cutting up your protein and hopefully wearing some nice cut resistant gloves, that's PPE. You mentioned hard hats, eyewear, et cetera. So PPE is, much more than meets the eye. And as you kind of referenced, not all PPE is created equal. So happy to talk a little bit about that and give some tips to your viewers on making sure that you find the right PPE that'll protect you and make sure that you can go home safe every day.
Very good. And I like that you mentioned more than meets the eye because we will be getting to eyewear as part of our discussion.
Perfect. Alrighty.
Let's start at the top and at the very top, and we're going to talk about head protection. So, what do we need to know about the current state modern head protection for construction workers?
Yeah, and it's a really exciting question. And I'll be the first to say, if you go to buy a hard hat or a helmet, it's a little bit like the Wild West right now. And on the one hand, it's exciting. There are so many options and choices for styles. It's like, this looks like looks like a traditional hard hat, something maybe more modern, like a climbing helmet. There's tons of different materials, different performance attributes. So on the one hand, that's amazing, right? It's never been easier to find something that fits, that protects, and is comfortable. On the other hand, it's pretty daunting. And so we are in the very final stages, Anthony, of publishing the revised version of the American National Standard for Industrial Head Protection. So standards, it's a bunch of letters and numbers. I'm going to throw this out for your audience. It's ANSI ISEA Z89.1. Again, that's a lot there. That's just the technical name for a standard. And why does that matter? So if you read the OSHA regs, right, we all want to comply with OSHA, of course. We all need to comply with OSHA. OSHA says, you just need to have head protection that complies to the Z89.1 standard. But they are often very out of date regulations. Not because OSHA doesn't care. They care passionately about safety. It's just even making a small change to a regulation takes a lot of time and a lot of money. And so, I'll talk a little bit more about what's in the new standard and why it's important. But again, compliance is not enough. Compliance doesn't equal the right protection for every type of job.
Now, is there anything that you can show me in hard hat wise in terms of where to look for markings, for certifications? Just
Sure.
going back to your comments about the Wild West and perhaps too many offerings in the market, and how do you choose? How do you pick?
Yeah, so the first thing is, unless you are a safety professional, and I'm not just saying someone who's been in the industry, but unless you're a safety professional, I would not recommend trying to pick out your own head protection. It's easy to pick the wrong thing. For example, we have something that looks like this, basically like a baseball cap kind of. We have something that looks like this, maybe a hard hat style, and then we have something that looks like this, climbing style helmet. the protection that each of those provides is really radically different, right? And the last thing that, of course, we want is to pick something that we expect to protect us that doesn't. Okay, so maybe giving you a little bit more specifics here. So there are two big standards when it comes to head protection. Okay, there is, I'll just use a shorthand here because I don't want to bore your listeners with a bunch of technical mumbo jumbo. There are bump caps, and those are covered by the standard ISEA 100. And that kind of looks, again, it looks sort of like, maybe a helmet you'd wear if you were, playing baseball. These are great if you're under something, like whether it's under a plane wing, maybe even working under a countertop. If you're going to bonk the top of your head, these are awesome. These are great. They don't have all the extra bells and whistles that frankly you won't need, will be uncomfortable. However, since most of your workers are going to be on job sites where that's not enough protection for most of them, they're going to want a type of head protection that is governed by Z89.1. And you got a few different flavors of that. And here's where I'll talk about what's coming in the new standard. Okay. So we have these climbing style helmets that we all see. A lot of workers are wearing these. First tip is when you look at the tag, which is going to be inside here, and it's going to have some numbers, which are really small font. Really want to pay attention to. First thing you want to look at, does it say type 1 or type 2? Okay. So a lot of people, guys, they make the mistake that, hey, it looks like a climbing style helmet. I'm assuming it's going to protect the top of my head. That's type 1, as well as the sides. That's type 2. That's not always true, right? So again, you cannot judge a book by its cover. You got to check the label for head protection. So just because something looks like a climbing style helmet, it might be what you need, but it might not. The other type of visual style, sometimes called a traditional hard hat. I don't like to use the term traditional because there's a ton of innovation in hard hats. This, for example, is a brimmed hard hat. Kind of, you could say, it looks pretty traditional. It has some amazing features in it. This is actually made out of a bioengineered plastic that I'm not a technical guy. It's made out of recycled something or another. It also has antimicrobial properties, so your head's not going to stink, which means you're more likely to wear it. Plus, there's a cool technology chip in here which helps do like compliance check-ins, checks out inspections, whatever. So again, it looks kind of like, this is traditional. This could have been something my dad or my granddad wore. Actually, a ton of amazing tech in here. So what's new then with the new standard? So the Z89 that's coming out in a few months. A couple things which are going to be really important to your listeners. So first thing is some jobs are more dangerous than others, right? And so we've added the designation plus. So for the new standard, there will be type 1 plus and type 2 plus. So without getting into too much detail, a couple of the key differences when you add that plus, a chin strap is required. And then there's added retention or roll-off kind of prevention. So in other words, it's going to stay on your head for several seconds longer than without. More protection isn't always better, right? Again, it really depends on the job you are trying to accomplish. But those are two kind of key monikers to look for, whether it's type 1 plus or type 2 plus. And again, that'll be coming out probably end of summer is the new Z89.1. And on our website, safetyequipment.org, we will have tons of information about it. We're probably going to, rent like a plane to do skywriting on it. So there'll be lots of information when the standard gets launched.
Good. So people don't need to walk this path alone. That's good to hear.
Yeah, please don't. And again, I'm a huge online shopper. But just one word of caution: there's tons of great PPE online. But if anyone ever wants to buy any type of PPE online, be really careful. There are things that are accidentally mismarked. Like we saw an example of a hard hat that was rated as providing a certain type of protection against a ton of electrical volts, right? So something if you touched a live wire, that you'd have some protection. You look at the thing, it has vents in it, and anyone in the industry says you can't have vents and have electrical protection. That's something we know because we're safety nerds, but a lot of folks wouldn't. So again, just when you're, just be careful buying online, just because it's unless you're an expert, there are lots of easy mistakes you could make. So again, calling the experts. We do this all the time. We're happy to help.
Excellent. I like how you say the accidental identification or misidentification.
Yeah. There's some on-purpose identification too. If you want to go there, we're happy to touch on that.
Oh, I think that would be a whole other
It would be a
conversation.
whole other conversation, believe me.
But anyway, let's keep moving. So
Yeah,
we understand some things about the state of the union when it comes to hard hats. Now let's move on to eyewear.
yeah, yeah. So there's a lot just for the purposes today, Anthony. I'm going to talk about kind of traditional safety eyewear. It can look like this. It can have, look like sunglasses, lots of different styles. The important thing to know about this is this type of safety eyewear also is covered by a standard, and that, again, sorry for the technical gibberish, it's ANSI ISEA Z87.1. We also just published a new version of this standard. And so the committee that works on this did a tremendous job simplifying and clarifying. So both what's in the standard, so they simplified and clarified how you do testing. It's like impact testing, right? These things, they look like, oh, this is just, cheap glass and plastic. It's not at all. You can hit this thing really hard, it'll protect you. So the new standard clarified that language. So as a worker, I'm probably not going to read the standard, but it's great that safety professionals at my company, they can know exactly, what protection they're buying for me. The second big change is product markings. And so I won't even try to hold it up to the camera because it's pretty small. I both wear glasses. It's hard to, squeeze lettering on here. But even with that, we clarified the product markings on here. So a worker can say, okay, hey, great, I see a Z87 plus. This provides me a different type of protection than just straight Z87. So that's a way, again, for workers, even if they're not standards experts, which, guys, we don't need to be, you can look quickly and say, great, is this Z87 protection or Z87 plus? So again, just trying to make these standards simpler, more understandable. And that way, if people understand it, then you can really help pick the protection that's right for your workers.
Now, a quick question for you, Cam, before we move on to some of the other topics we're
Yeah.
covering. Let's say I'm a small contractor,
Mhm.
maybe a crew of, let's say, a dozen,
Mhm.
myself included,
Yeah.
and I don't have the resources for a dedicated safety professional on
Yeah.
staff to
Right.
know and understand and interpret all of these things. Can they turn to someone to an organization such as you for
Yeah.
resources?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think one of the things we're fortunate at in the United States is we have this great ecosystem of companies and organizations. We all have the mission to protect workers, and we have a ton of knowledge. So, my company, my association's happy to help. Probably the best places to go are the people and companies that want to sell you things. And so they have a vested interest in doing this. So any distributor, a lot of the distributors out there, they're going to have people that have been trained in something called the QSSP, or Qualified Safety Sales Professional Program. What does this mean? This is basically a crash course in OSHA regs, product standards, job hazard assessments, different types of PPE. So as you think about, your distributor, the more that you can buy from someone at your distributor, have those conversations where they come to your work site and say, great, you got 12 people. I can help you do a job hazard assessment. Maybe 2 of your workers need head protection that protects the top of their head. These other 10 workers need protection with the chin strap, et cetera. Someone with the QSSP, for example, can do that. There's no extra fee for it. And they can help match you up with different products and brands. The real thing is this. So, we're talking about, protection and impact and all that. People aren't going to wear PPE if it's not comfortable and they don't feel good in it. And we just did a study with JJ Keller that backed that up. Number 1 and 2 reasons people don't wear PPE, didn't feel like they had to, didn't feel like it didn't fit. So another thing that QSSP safety professional can help you with, they can do fit trials for your workers, right? So instead of just saying, here's the hard hat everyone's going to wear, like it or not, what's your size, small, medium, large, what they can do is bring in different models, different brands for all different types of PPE. Let your workers try. That's probably going to be the single most effective way to get your workers to actually wear what you're providing them. In my office building today, we got some guys and gals doing construction work out in the hallway, and some of them had high vis vests that probably hadn't been changed for 2.5 years. And so PPE is not set it and forget it. A lot of PPE expires. Most hard hats after 2 years, even if they look great, you shouldn't use them anymore. So make sure that with any program, again, if you don't have the technical expertise, no sweat, bring back that qualified safety sales professional and say, hey, you know what, help us build a program where we understand how often should I be replacing my gloves, my eyewear, et cetera. That's another, big area we see for improvements is not just set it and forget it.
That's a good point. And honestly, I'd never really thought about that. I'm one of those guys who, I still have a hard hat from, 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah, right. It's good if it's on the shelf, yeah, just maybe don't wear it on the job site.
Yeah, it's doing a great job protecting the shelf it's on. Yeah, you're
Perfect,
right.
perfect. All right. Then that's all right.
All right. Now you talked about or made mention of one of my favorite topics a little earlier on, somebody cutting meat
Yeah.
that I might be able to put on the barbecue.
Yep.
So that naturally segues into let's talk about what's new and different with gloves.
There's so much going on with gloves too. So gloves are a really exciting topic. And I will say, especially as we're all heading into the July 4th holiday, chopping stuff up, we think, oh, hey, no big deal. I'm just gonna, use a meat cleaver over and over again. The average hand injury, this is occupational, it's $46,000. Obviously there's the injury, it's painful, it's terrible. But when you think about time off work, indemnity, medical costs, these things are really serious. And none of us wants to have like a tendon cut. So that's my plug. Please wear your gloves. 70% of hand injuries happen because someone wasn't wearing a glove that they were supposed to. So keep that in mind. So first thing I'd want to share. So here's an example of cut resistant gloves. And so here's another example of cut resistant gloves. Okay. So these, they might, different colors, they're relatively similar fabrics. They actually provide very different types of protection. And my first piece of advice here, unless you're a safety expert, don't try to look at this little label here and assume that you can decode it, right? We have lots of resources on the ISEA website, but again, if you're not sure what A5, A2, any of that means, if that stresses you out, again, hit pause, find someone at your company. And if you have no one, your distributor, of course, give us a call. So with hand protection, we do the standard for that. It's ANSI ISEA 105. And we have this little pentagon diagram on there, and that tells you a heck of a lot about the glove. It tells you, great, this provides a certain level of cut resistance and then puncture resistance as well. And so again, depending on the kind of work you're doing, say if you're cutting metal, you do not want to have a really lightweight glove that, the first time you get hit with metal, it tears through the glove. And so again, as you understand those ratings, make sure that if you need a glove that has a high level of cut resistance, like an A7, A8, that's what you're using, not something that's made for a really light duty job. Another type of glove, and this is going to look super different. I'll get this out of the bag here, is impact resistant. And you feel like you're gonna be like Tony Stark or Iron Man here with these guys. There's a ton of padding on here, and impact resistant gloves, guess what? They kind of do what you would imagine from the name. So whether you're using a jackhammer, sledgehammer, if you're on an oil rig, anything where there's a lot of impact, these are going to go a long way towards protecting you. And I get it. I like to think I'm, a tough guy, but when folks don't wear those types of gloves, they'll get arthritis, they'll have terrible lacerations. So these are those things that make sure you're wearing the gloves. And if they don't fit, tell your boss. If they have a tear, absolutely tell your boss. Just as with the other types of PPE, gloves do not last forever. Some are intended for daily use, some are intended, for a little longer, but just make sure that when you're working with your distributor, find out, great, are these disposables I pitch every day? Are these things I can use a week? What's a sign I need to replace it? But yeah, that's another area where we see lots of injuries because, people aren't wearing what they should. It doesn't fit like it should. So make sure that you have the right protection and then it fits and you wear it.
Actually, those impact resistant gloves, those are very cool.
Yeah, they really are. Yeah, no, I know it's especially coming into July 4th holiday. It's I feel like I need an eagle flying over. They're great. They're great.
Let's see. Now we've covered hands, we've covered head,
Yep.
we've covered face with the eyes. There's one more that I would like to get into, something that, well, I mean, every facility, structure, house of every kind should have, but definitely job sites is first aid kits.
Absolutely.
So what has changed? What's new? What's different? What are the
Yeah.
best practices for first aid kits today?
Yeah. And Anthony, that's the question. What are the best practices, right? So one of the great things about OSHA is the regs are not overly prescriptive. In other words, if you go to the part of the OSHA CFR that talks about first aid, it's not 50,000 words saying you have to have exactly this and this. That's great. That gives everyone flexibility. That allows innovation. The downside is if you think I just need to comply with OSHA, guess what? OSHA basically says you have to have a first aid kit. And that's it. It doesn't say what goes in the first aid kit, how many you need, any of that. So that's where ISEA comes in. So we work with industry, and we are just about to publish the latest version of the first aid kit standard, which is ANSI ISEA Z308.1. Again, another blockbuster name, but a heck of a lot is changing in this one. And I think one of the nice things that your audience will appreciate, some of these are requirements for the standard, but a lot of it is actually just guidance. So again, recognizing every job site's different, right? What you need on a construction site might be different than a data center. So some of the key things that are guidance that we recommend as part of the standard, number one is a tourniquet. So the current version of the standard, we didn't include a ton of detail about what type of tourniquet. And so here's the problem with that. We had several stories we heard of instead of a true, kind of like a cat tourniquet, they were basically using, like the rubber they wrap around your arm, like when you go to get your blood drawn. And if you have an arterial injury, that's not going to do anything. And so the new standard has guidance for what type of tourniquet. So that if something terrible happens, if you're not wearing your cut resistant gloves, for example, and you do, nick an artery, the type of tourniquet that we recommend in the new standard will be the right one. So that's a really important thing. Second thing is mobile workers, right? We don't all work on job sites where there are dozens or hundreds of other folks. And so we have additional guidance for mobile workers and also training. Something else is, we have a multicultural, multilingual workforce. And let's be real, a lot of us speak English, but some of us don't, especially if there's an incident, and if English isn't our first language, it's our brains aren't at their best. And so we have a first aid guide requirement in the new standard that has to be both in English and Spanish. Two last things, which we're really excited about and proud of, are optional supplements. And we did it this way again, recognizing that work sites are different. But one is anti-opioid overdose medication. So, naloxone. We're recommending that either be in the kit or actually more likely next to the kit. Because again, when you need it, you don't have a lot of time and you don't want to be, shuffling around in a kit, trying to move the aspirin. And so that is a recommendation. And then in addition, we are recommending anti-choking devices. I saw a stat that only, I think, like not even 50% of Americans know how to do the Heimlich maneuver, and that's not enough, right? And so there are some pretty incredible anti-choking devices out there that we're recommending, again, as part of kind of supplemental products in the kit that can they are basically miraculous. They can prevent a worker choking. So this again will come out in 2 or 3 months. And my advice to your listeners is if you think I just want to check the box and be OSHA compliant, that's great, but you're not going to be ready if there's an incident. And so following, the new first aid standard, especially, reading the guidance, we're going to publish a ton of information on this, so we'll keep it simple, but having some of those supplements, like, making sure that you have a real tourniquet, not just a rubber band, making sure that, naloxone's available, making sure that you have anti-choking devices, that's just going to make sure that you and your workers are ready when an accident does happen.
That's amazing. Cam, I didn't even know that anti-choking devices existed.
You know what? I didn't either. It's one of those things, that's the problem with PPE. Someone says, I've never worn it. I never wore my gloves. I've never had a problem. And, it's the same with any type of PPE, anti-choking device, anything. You don't need it until you really do. And so, our advice is obviously be OSHA compliant, but there are so many innovations out there with the intent of protecting your workers, of preventing injury or responding to injury. That, that's part of our duty, I think, to being good employers, is making sure that, we're keeping up on these innovations and giving our workers the best, because that's what we ask of them. So we should definitely, return the favor.
Exactly. No, I'm glad you bring that point up. I mean, all these things cost money, and someone might look at that and say, "Oh, but these incidents don't happen," or "What are the chances of this incident happening?"
Right.
But then when it does, you're like, "Dang, I wish I had that
Right.
equipment."
Yeah, and then and to that cost question, and that's an important one. I mean, we're businesses. You can't, we have to balance, being financially responsible. And again, I think that's the important of really doing a job hazard assessment, right? So it's not, the answer that we recommend is not, buy the most expensive of everything and have, 50 extra, pairs of coveralls on hand just in case. That's not what we recommend, because it's not practical. There are folks, whether it's with your distributor or manufacturer or others, that do job hazard analysis and assessments full time, and they can help walk through, say, great, this type of job, you don't need, the $150 hard hat, right? They might only need top of the head protection, and that's something you can give them exactly what they need for a lower price point. However, that type of job that is much riskier, you need XYZ. And so again, I think really, doing the best service to your workers is being smart and strategic about how you protect them.
And bring in the professionals who will be able to do that assessment
Yeah.
so that you know that what you're buying is actually appropriate to that worker or to the
Yeah.
task, and not just spending money on things you may not need because this other thing will do the job
Exactly.
quite nicely.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think, one of a great example of that is cut resistant gloves. And so there are cut resistant gloves that are, a very high level. So they're, I kind of exaggerate here. I mean, you could, have like a meat cleaver, and it wouldn't cut through your, I mean, they're remarkable, right? One of the challenges with that, intentionally, you have a little bit less dexterity at a really high cut resistant level. And so what we don't want is a worker saying, "Oh, I'm just going to get the most protective thing and use that all the time." Because what usually happens then is they'll say, "Oh, I don't quite have enough mobility. I'll just take it off for a moment." And that's when something happens, right? So again, realizing I don't need the highest level of protection. This is actually something where it'll work perfectly for opening boxes or cutting metal, but I still have enough dexterity. And it fits me. This is the kind of glove that people will wear, won't take off. And then if you have a slip, you'll be completely fine. So again, making sure that what you're using is right for the job, because some of the higher levels of protection might not be appropriate.
And to your point, you can get the best protection available, but if it doesn't suit the worker, uh, then they won't wear it, they won't use it, and you've wasted your money.
Yeah, and that's a really smart point. I think a lot of this is technical, and you think, wow, I get a little overwhelmed by the standards and type A and class B. That, again, no problem. Bring in an expert who can help. The thing where, your viewers and readers really need to lean in is the most important thing that they can do is make sure that the workers want to wear it, or they accept wearing it, right? That it fits, that they feel good in it. And we see a lot of job sites when the workers have that opportunity to try different styles on. And oftentimes they say, "I like these safety eyewear because I feel actually cool. They look like something that I would want to wear on the weekends." That's a huge win, right? So involving them, giving them, some authority and autonomy, that's the best way to get workers to wear it and to feel good and confident.
Cam, thanks so much for joining me, Metal Construction News, to talk about the latest in protective equipment. I'm glad we're having this conversation now because it's actually pretty cool that all these standards are being updated and published imminently with
Yeah.
new cutting edge information. So the timing is fantastic. And again, June National Safety Month. You can't go wrong having this conversation. So before we break, Cam, where can people go to get more information about this and other uh, safety information?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for the opportunity, Anthony. The best place to go is our website, and it's safetyequipment.org. And that'll give you great basic information in plain language. You can also get geeky and technical if you want on the standards, but from anything from hard hats to gloves to footwear to knee protection. So it's safetyequipment.org, and that's really a one-stop shop for great information about PPE.
Cam, thanks again for taking the time to join me.
All right, thanks so much, Anthony.